Hey, Warren here. Welcome back to Black Sea Garage. Today we're going to be finishing up the back brakes on Project Camaro here. But before we do that, I thought I'd give you a rundown of the brake system on the car, where it started out at, where it is now, and the direction we're headed in. That way you get an idea of where we're coming from. So as you see, I got some things laid out here on the table already. When this car came off the assembly line in 1979, it had disc brakes in front and drum brakes in the back, unfortunately. But one cool thing was the Trans Ams of the same year did have four-wheel disc brakes. So it wasn't long before I went to the junkyard, swapped out a set of Trans Am disc brakes, which had a bracket like this, which fit on the outside. Then it had the metric caliper with the parking brake, and just a regular plain Jane rotor. Later, I moved up to an aftermarket kit, which had a bracket with bolted from the inside, and it also had a metric style caliper with a parking brake, and at least it had drilled and slotted rotors. So then I transferred this over to the new rear end when I blew out the 10 bolt and I put the 9 inch in. I spent all the money on the 9 inch. So I put this back on the car. And then last year I wanted to try autocross, so I swapped out the generic metric caliper for a Wilwood aftermarket one, which is a direct bolt in. So that's where we finished up at the end of last year. I really had a lot of fun autocrossing, want to do it a lot more. Bought Project Firebird there just to be an autocross car. But until then, this has got to do double duty as a drag car and an autocross car. So the biggest brakes I can get and still be able to keep a 15-inch wheel with a stiff wall slick is this system here. This will be the last system I put on the car. It has a drilled and slotted rotor, a little bit bigger than stock. It also has a parking brake, which is a drum style parking brake, which goes on the inside. And then it has a 4-piston caliper, which will be an upgrade. So that's what we're going to end up with, and that's what we'll be putting on the car today. Switching over from a system that was bolted from the inside to one that's now bolted on the outside required to basically break the whole thing down and start all over again. So that's where we're at right now. The axle's out, everything's off. I've cleaned off all the silicone. I've looked everything over. Looks good. So we're basically ready to start over and start reassembling. I'm going to start with these 4 bolts. These are 3/8 coarse thread. They're 1.25 inch, grade 8. I ground down 1 flat on each one, and I will use that extra flat and run them in. So I'll put those 4 in and get ready to put in the axle. Once you got your 4 bolts in place, you can grab the parking brake unit and slide it over the 4 bolts. Then we'll put the axle in next, and then once we get the axle in, this will slide up and slide over the bolts, and we will use some locking nuts to fasten it down. I'm getting the axle ready to put back in. I'm trying one of these bearings that have the O-ring in it already, and according to the manufacturer and the Quick Performance, they shouldn't need any silicone at all, but I don't want to have to take it back out at any point in time. I'm kind of lazy. So I am going to take the O-ring out. I'm going to fill the groove with a little bit of black silicone. I'm going to put the O-ring back in, and then I'm going to insert the axle. So now I'll slide this puppy in carefully. Semi-carefully. Maybe give it a couple taps with the influencer. Okay. We got this bracket's got to slide up underneath somehow. This is what holds the axle in. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to get the bolts on. Just take your time. So I got the bracket over all 4 bolts. So now I will put the lock nuts on and tighten it down. I'll slowly draw these down and then I will torque them down to 30 foot-pounds. All right, that's done. Next we can throw on the rotor. It has a concentric ring that goes on first. There we go. Use 3 lug nuts. Tighten it down. We're ready to test fit the new 4-piston caliper. I already did the other side, so I know that probably 4 shims is a good place to start anyway. So I'm going to put 4 shims on each spot, and I'm going to tighten it down, and I'll visually look at it and see if it looks like it's lined up or not. I got the caliper bolted up with 4 shims. And I know it's a little bit hard to see on the video, but it is closer over here on this edge than it is over here. So if I add probably 1 more shim, it'll pretty much even out the space. You probably won't get it perfect. They only give you 1 thickness of shims, so I might be a little bit off one side or the other, but try and get as close as you can. Looks like 5 shims are going to work here, so I will go ahead and try that. The caliper's been reinstalled with 5 shims, and as you can see, I know it's hard, but it's a whole lot closer side to side, and the line up the middle is very close to the middle of the rotor. So I call that good. As I say, you're not going to probably get it absolute perfect because they only give you 1 thickness of shims. So now that that looks right, I am ready to move on to the next little thing you really got to pay attention to. The other thing that's really critical with the bolt attaching the calipers is what they're talking about on page 5. If you look on page 5, the instructions, the bolt bolting the caliper down, here's the 5 washers we just put in. You don't want it sticking out too far because it'll dig into the rotor. But at the same time, you want every single bit of thread engagement you can get. So you want the bolt to come all the way out as far without touching the rotor. Rather than play with grinding the nut down and stuff like that, I went ahead and I played with the thickness of the washer on the head bolt bolting the caliper down. That gave me a little bit of variance, and I was able to find the exact right thread engagement all the way to the end doing it that way. This should be the final install for the caliper. The 5 shims got it centered up nicely. I've got this bolt through. I've got full thread engagement, it looks like, without touching the inside of the rotor. So I went ahead and Loctited these bolts and torqued them down to 40 foot-pounds, and everything looks good. So I am ready to put in the brake pads and then put the pin in. See, simple as that. put the pin in and spread it out on the far side. And now that I got this bolted down, I'll go ahead and put the fitting for the brake line in with a little PTFE tape, and then I'll take my time and bend the brake line around till it fits. I'm ready to tackle the parking brake, which always seems to be a pain in the ass. Here are my original parking brake cables. I had like one medium one and one really long one. Whenever you're working on the cables, what seems to be a problem is you order cables that are supposed to be right, and then they'll end up sending you two short pieces of crap that are nowhere close to being right. So here's what I did. I ordered a kit from Quick Performance. What they sent me was the kit for a 59 to 64 Chevrolet Impala. It wasn't the exact same lengths as my original ones, but two good-sized medium ones that look like they came out to be the same length as my two originals, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. When you're retrofitting cables, there's a few things you got to work through. The first is this General Motors end like this, which does not at all work with the Ford end on the parking brake. So let's take care of that first. The parking brake is actuated by a lever like most Fords have right here. It obviously does not fit up with a General Motors style end, so we got to do something about that. Honestly, the redneck in me wanted to just cut a slot right along here and jam that wire in there, but it's probably not the right thing to do. Probably weakens it up too much because the slot would be going the same way you're yanking on it. So let's think about that and we'll fix it the right way. The clevis here is on the end of the Chevy cable. Here's where I slotted it. I went ahead and pinched this a little bit so the cable couldn't pop out. So it can snap on to the Ford lever here. But this brings up a couple other problems we gotta solve. Adding this changes the length that this spring needs to be. It shortens it up. So we have to cut some lengths out of this spring in order to get it to fit in here. So that, and also this bracket that the cable's held into is thicker than the original. So I have to modify the end of this over here just a little bit. But first let's work on this spring. By using this clevis as an adapter, you're shortening up the distance that you have for the spring. So you need to cut some ends off of this. Go conservative, because if you end up taking off too much, you're screwed. So I just keep clipping these off and shortening it up, try it, push it in. Being everything's aftermarket, the distance might not be totally the same. So that's what I'm working on now. I think it's the only modification I need to make, and shouldn't take too long. So with the clevis on and the spring shortened up to the right length, I was able to get it on here. My other main issue is with this huge shock, the QA1 shocks are bigger diameter, so I had to grind the side of this bracket down to get the shock to fit. And also this bracket is thicker than the original bracket, so the prongs on this thing wouldn't pop out, so I had to just kind of grind on them and shorten them a little bit, and then they pulled out and hold fine. So I think this is going to work great. I consider this to be the end of the basic install. I got a new Wilwood master cylinder and proportioning valve to balance out these brakes for racing, so I'll be putting that on and I'll bleed these brakes at that time. And I'm also looking for a 3rd gen parking brake that's off the console. I like that a lot better than the foot down in the corner. So I'll work on that before I do the front of the cables. And so that's about it. Other than that, I'll show you a couple things I noticed while I was working back here. The first thing Captain Obvious noticed was that the tires are rubbing on both sides of the wheel wells. Right there is a bump out where the rear seatbelt mechanism went. So those were long gone anyway. So I'll take a little influencer and just pound them out. Or pound them in, I mean. throw a little paint on and we are done. The other thing I noticed was my QA1 shock got scratched up a little bit from the bracket on the spring. So I ground that down just a little bit and made some extra room for it so it doesn't scratch my beautiful shock absorber anymore. That's all I got for this video. I'll have another one coming out soon. It's been a crazy spring here at Black Sea. Most of it is not good. So it's been a scramble here, but I'll get another video out soon. I hope you guys will check it out. And I appreciate you guys checking out this one. Later.